resistance. But I also want to lift up the people inside Russia.
That's right.
Because there are so many of them. In fact, there was a petition that was signed by 1.5 million people in Russia saying no to this war. And you know, it's becoming more and more difficult in Russia to voice your opinion. They've closed down a lot of independent media, and they have also passed a law making it illegal to do what they say is misinformation, disinformation. But they've also said to people that there's not a war going on, there's a military action. We know it's a war. But despite the risks, there are over 7,000 people that have been arrested in anti-war rallies inside of Russia. Despite the risks, there are 15,000 healthcare workers who have signed a petition saying that their job is to take care of people. Their job is to heal people. And they can't stand by in silence while their government is killing people and maiming people. And so we salute the courage of those 15,000 doctors, nurses, and other healthcare workers. There's also 600 scientists who have signed a petition against using science for military means and saying that we as scientists are calling for an end to the violence. And so think of all those people inside of Russia who are taking much greater risks than we take here when we're standing up to our government. And they're doing it every single day. And we at Code Pink have put out a letter in solidarity with the anti-war protesters in Russia. You can go to our website, codepink.org, and sign up. And in fact, we're timing it for March 8th, International Women's Day, because we want feminists, and we consider you feminists, whatever your gender is, as long as you believe in the principles of feminism. We are saying that as feminists, we abhor war, that war must end, and that we must stand together non-violently to demand an end to war. We must come together, the world community, to say we understand how dangerous this moment is. I mean, who knew before World War I it was going to break out into an entire world war? You never know what are going to be those triggers. And right now, we see triggers. A terrible war going on inside Ukraine, and a call, understandable call by people who are facing this horrific violence to say, we want help, and we want a no-fly zone. Now, on the surface of it, that sounds like a logical thing. A no-fly zone to stop the bombing. But anybody who knows anything about no-fly zones knows what it really means. It means you have to be ready to shoot down Russian planes. And as soon as there is one NATO country that shoots down a Russian plane, that is a horrific expansion of this war and could totally lead to World War III, could totally lead to a nuclear catastrophe. Now, why do countries have nuclear weapons? Well, they say it's to stop other countries from invading them or using them. But we know right now the world has been on the brink of annihilation because of these nuclear weapons. And if you drive Putin into a corner where he sees no way out and he's not winning the war, I don't know you could put it past him to use a nuclear weapon. I don't know. But I don't want to go that far. And I think that there are people in this government, in that White House right there, that understand how dangerous this moment is. And as much as we don't like what successive governments have done, Republican and Democrat, to arm Ukraine, to expand NATO, to create real real threats to Russia's national security. Right now, I think Biden understands. And that's why he is saying there are not going to be troops fighting inside of Ukraine. And he is saying, for the moment, right now, he's saying, no-fly zone is not on the table. But there is tremendous pressure on him right now. There's tremendous pressure coming from Republicans, from Democrats, and from Ukrainian American community, from Zelensky, from people inside of Ukraine, from the media that is pressing him day after day after day. Tremendous pressure to say, we need a no-fly zone, change your policy, Biden. And so we have to be there saying, no way. That is such a dangerous red line that is so impossible to cross without leading to more catastrophe. We have to convince other people, we have to explain to other people what a no-fly zone means. We have to explain to other people what it would mean if U.S. were directly involved in this war. Now, we know we're involved in so many different ways because we've been arming Ukraine since 2014. But a more direct involvement will lead to a wider war, and many Europeans understand that. And that's why they're joining us today in a global day of action all across the world to say no to Russian troops, yes to a ceasefire, yes to negotiations and peace talks now, and no to NATO expansion. So we are excited that we have a great coalition that includes a group called Stop the War UK, a group that we at Code Pink have been working with for over 20 years now because we came together to call that massive day of global action against the U.S. invasion of Iraq. And we've come together to say no to the invasion of Afghanistan, no to the invasion of Libya, and no to NATO expansion. So we're working with them as well as a group in the UK called Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. And we're working with a group called No to NATO. And way before this Ukraine invasion happened, we were planning for the next NATO summit, which is going to be in Madrid in June. And we were ready to mobilize for that NATO summit to say what we believe in our hearts, which is NATO is not a defensive organization. NATO is an aggressive militarist organization. How can you call it a defensive organization that has been for 20 years in Afghanistan, that orchestrated the invasion of Libya? How can you call that a defensive organization that has looked to China and said China is a threat to our security? This is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization saying a country in the Pacific and China is a threat. So we know that NATO also has as one of its stated goals is to increase military expenditures. That every country that is part of NATO is supposed to fulfill its goal. Now, I find this so mind-blowing that a goal would be to increase your military spending to 2% of gross national product. Now, you know, other organizations come together to say we want to end global poverty or we want to stop the climate crisis. I mean, for good things. But NATO come together and said we need to spend more money on military. And so they have been trying for years to convince the European countries, because we spend way more than 2% of our GDP on military, to convince the other NATO countries to spend that. And there were only 5 NATO countries, and you know there's 30 NATO countries, only 5 of them had actually done it. And there were cheers, yay, you know, this country is now spending 2% of its GDP. And why weren't they more of the countries spending more? Because there was resistance internally. Because people inside those countries say, no, we want to keep our national health care system, something we've never had, and we don't want to spend that money instead on planes and tanks. And so because of that resistance, they've managed to hold the line. Well, you know what? Once this Ukraine invasion happened, they're all increasing their budgets on military. They're all now going to fulfill this goal of 2% of their GDP on military. This is a bonanza for the weapons manufacturers. This makes them so wealthy, and it also means that all the work that many of us have done for years to try to cut our growth. We thought maybe after the U.S. left Afghanistan, there might be something called a peace dividend, like we had after the war in Vietnam, where people didn't want to go to war anymore and they didn't want to spend so much money on war, and so some of that money was invested in good things that the society needs. And people are working hard, still working hard, to transfer some of that money from the Pentagon budget and invest it in health care for all, invest it in canceling student debt, investing it in green jobs, investing in the things that make people's lives better. Now, it's going to be 1,000 times harder to cut that Pentagon budget. In fact, we already know that that Pentagon budget is going up because Biden already said it. And he requested another $10 billion for Ukraine. Now, $10 billion, where does that come from? I guess, because we can't get that money when we want it for our health care or for debt or for all those things that we need. But suddenly, it's there for more military. So we're in a terrible time right now. The people in Ukraine